Well, earlier this week, Peter Dutton confirmed the Federal Liberal Party's opposition to an Indigenous voice to Parliament. Among his criticisms of the proposed reform was that it would be a, quote, voice from Canberra, rather than an effective representation for Indigenous people.
The opposition leader cited Indigenous leaders from regional and remote parts of Australia as saying the voice wouldn't represent their views on the ground. The ABC has been speaking to people in remote parts of WA to find out what they think of the proposed voice and what concerns they have about the process.
Another lengthy process that's going to cost a lot of money, money that could have already gone towards grassroots projects in remote communities and regional towns. They have no real power. If the government wants to enact another heavy-handed policy, the voice could object to it, but the government can choose to ignore them. The social issues and stuff, it seems to be getting, worse every couple of generations.
I am a supporter of The Voice. I was involved in the Uluru Dialogue at the time, a couple of years ago when it came out. Historically, when we've had a say in determining our future, that's when things have worked well. When we haven't had that say, it's when things haven't worked well. I see The Voice as a good first step. We don't have the enshrined voice in Parliament that we need to make everlasting and long-lasting change. I don't think it's the only step, but I definitely think it's a step in the right direction.
I wonder if you're seeing a level of engagement around this discussion about the voice to Parliament.
I would have liked to have seen more. Maybe I just wasn't present, or it wasn't. There wasn't enough energy and support put back to it. But I obviously being part of the Aboriginal community here and talking to a lot of people, there are a lot of concerns that there was a strong lack of engagement.
There is support for The Voice, but I echo some of Bart's comments around how it will be implemented is still a little bit unclear for some communities. But what I know is that when you put Aboriginal people at the centre of policy making and co-design and delivery of programs to our communities, your chance of success in terms of getting outcomes is markedly higher.
All right, let's speak now to Dan Borscher, the ABC's national referendum and voice correspondent. He's in Fitzroy Crossing in WA. Dan Borscher, welcome. It's good to have you on this morning.
Joe, good morning. Good to be with you.
Now, as we say, you're in Fitzroy Crossing, travelling through the Kimberley. Peter Dutton has labelled this the Canberra voice. You've been speaking to people outside of Canberra. What else have they been telling you about the voice, the eventual outcome, and also the process?
Yeah, Joe, I've been here on Bunuba country now for about 4 days and hearing a range of views from those saying that this is something that there wasn't necessarily the types of consultation leading up to that involved everyone right through to those who are saying that this is the way forward, that having a mechanism to be heard in the halls of Parliament and by those in power is absolutely crucial. Others privately, Joe, are saying that they're concerned about the unknowns of the voice, that it could lead to more politicians and fewer outcomes. There's also been a lot of discussion right here, as you'd imagine, about the recovery and the rebuild after those really devastating floods that we saw over summer. And so many that I've been speaking to have been saying actually the priority here is to be heard by politicians and policymakers about what's needed to deal with overcrowding in homes, the health impacts that flow from that, and also the lack of basic services that so many in this remote community are really grappling with. But as many people as there are around these communities, there are varied views. There is a perspective from some that I've been hearing, Joe, completely baffled with the opposition leader coming out so strongly to announce that the Liberal Party would not only vote against the voice, but would also actively campaign against it. There are people that I've been speaking to that are shaking their heads saying, what is this all about and why have they chosen to do this, particularly now?
Well, even people within the Liberal base as well. We saw Ken Wyatt, the former Indigenous Affairs Minister, quit the Liberal Party this week. What sort of divisions is this causing within that Liberal Party base?
Well, from what we can see, those divisions are running deep. And consider this for a moment, Joe. Less than 12 months ago, Ken Wyatt was the Minister for Indigenous Australians. He was a senior cabinet minister making decisions about the future of the nation. Less than 12 months later, and he's quit the party over this position. And we've heard over the recent months that Ken Wyatt has really been advocating for a considered position. At one point, speaking to the ABC, he said that there should be a position where MPs in the Liberals could vote however they like, that there was a conscience vote, if you will, and that the party not take a strong position. As a result of this, we've also seen a number of other senior Liberals coming out saying that they're concerned about this. For those who have been members of the party for a long time, saying that this is very alarming about the direction that the party is taking. And there have certainly been commentators, Joe, who are suggesting that this is an indication that the Liberal Party is moving further to the right and becoming more conservative rather than more to the centre, which is what many after the May election last year were saying was where the Liberal Party needed to land.
Dan, we also had that sad news this week that Yunupingu had sadly passed away. How has that affected the tone of the debate this week?
Well, it certainly loomed large, Joe, and everywhere that I've been going, people have been reflecting on the life, the legacy and the impact of Yunupingu, of the way that he spoke up for Yolngu people in Arnhem Land, but also the way that his advocacy, the impact that had for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people across the nation. A long time chair of the Central Land Council and of course the 1978 Australian of the Year. He's been an enormous presence in the politics of Indigenous affairs and Australian politics for decades. In fact, it's something like on country with Yunupingu, talking about the state of the nation and where to from here. And of course, he had a big role in the referendum process. He was on the referendum working group, and arguably it was what he called for some decades ago that became this movement around recognition and about enshrining a voice within the Constitution. So it's certainly been a big part of the conversation, and I must note, so many people that I'm bumping into are paying their respects and they're reflecting upon the impact that he's had on our whole nation.
Dan, just finally, obviously this will eventually be decided by the Australian people when they vote in the referendum, but what impact does this political debate and division have on the final outcome? And what does this past week tell us about how the rest of this time in the lead up to the referendum will play out?
Well, I'll start with your last question first. I think that this sends somewhat of an ominous sign. The sorts of commentary that we've been hearing throughout this week and the ratcheting up of language has got a lot of people that I've been speaking to feeling a little bit nervous. In fact, right here on Bunuba country, many people have been saying, regardless of what your position is, we need to be able to have a respectful conversation about this. So there is certainly a concern, a red thread of that running right through the communities that I've been travelling around and those people that I've been talking to. In terms of the politics, it's a really interesting one. There have only been 8 of 44 referendums that have been successful in Australian history. None of those have happened without bipartisan support. It's been argued that because of the two-prong test for referendums to pass, a majority of people in a majority of states, that it's actually the premiers and the chief ministers that are more crucial to this role than the federal opposition. And we know that at the last time that all of those leaders gathered together, that there was that unanimous signature or that document that was signed by all the state and territory leaders saying that they were committing to the voice to Parliament and to the Uluru Statement in full. Now, of course, since then, there's been an election in New South Wales. Dominic Perrottet is no longer the Premier. Chris Minns is now. It's understood that he is on that same page. However, that's unclear. Interestingly, this week we also heard from the Premier of Tasmania, who's the only Liberal leader across the nation now, the most senior elected Liberal in Australia. He's also said that he's going to be campaigning for the Voice, and what we're seeing now is different Liberal parties around the nation really putting a nuanced position of separating themselves in part from what the position of the federal Liberals is. From the government's perspective, they say that this is the opposition, or as the Prime Minister sometimes refers to them as the Noalition, really dealing themselves out of this national debate.
All right, Dan Borscher there in Fitzroy Crossing. Great to speak to you this morning. Thanks so much.
Thank you.